Gemara. Today's daf is daf Yud Zayin, and we're talking about Tumah, and and now we're discussing or focusing on a case where you actually became tummy inside the Beis Hamikdash itself. Not like in the first mission in Masechta that you walked into the Beis Hamikdash and you're tummy, you forgot, and then you remembered. What you forgot, we discussed. This Mishnah here in the second page adds another case, and that is you became tummy in the Beis Hamikdash yourself, and you knew, you forgot. The same thing, but where you become tummy in the Beis Hamikdash. So we discussed over here, and exactly how do we know, and all that, and then you have to basically walk out. And when are you chayiv if there was shehiyah? You spent a little bit of time there. Either you bow down, or if you didn't bow down, if you spent the time it takes normally to bow down. And then the Mishnah says you have to walk out the short way. If you walked out the long way, you're chayiv because you spent more time there than you should have. And we're talking about where you weren't aware, so you were talking about bringing a karma chatas. So the Mishnah says we're up to the design of it. I'll write in the middle of the page the two dots. If you left the Beis Hamikdash the longer way, you're chayiv. You spend more time than you should have. A big tzara, you took the shortcut. What should you do? You became tummy in the Beis Hamikdash, and you left straight away. Amar Rava says, Rava. Tzara, actually, it's a Rabbah. Tzara she'amru, when we say the short way, afilu ekev b'tzad goydel. Some say Rava, some say Rabbah. Afilu ekev b'tzad goydel. Even if you walked out very slowly, that you had, you put one foot in front of your other foot, touching each other. So it would take you a lot longer to walk out than you would have gone quicker. Afilu kolayem kulei. Even if you spent the entire day, you took a whole day to walk out the shortcut, it doesn't matter. You're still putty because you went out the shortest way possible. You have two routes, you took the shortest one. He's boy Rav, so Rav asked a question. Shehiyais mahu sheyitztarfu. What happens? You didn't continuously walk the short way. You walked, you paused, you walked, you paused. Do we take all these pauses and combine them and say, that all of these pauses equal the amount of time that you could have bowed down? And yes, you had a machlekes, how long, when we say bowing down, how long? So we had a pasuk, and some say from the middle of the pasuk to the end, and some say from the beginning of the pasuk to the end. Not very long. But if you combine all the shehiyas, it wasn't one pause, you combine them, they combine or not. Says the Gemara, you just said if you spent a whole day walking down the short route, you're still put as long as you took the short route. So what's his question? So my answer is there he just walked very, very slowly, but he never paused. That's when he means you're put. But if you pause, that's a question. Do they combine or not? I don't answer it. Boy, asked Rabba, interesting question. And this question actually interesting. We find in the Bes Yosef and his Sefer about something else. In a minute. Rabbi asked Rabbi a question. When we say shortcut or the shorter way or the longer way, are we talking about the time, or we're talking about necessarily you have to take the short route? In other words, is it because the short route takes you only 2 minutes to go out and the long route takes you 3 minutes to go out, so therefore you need to take the short route? So what happens if it's a question of time? What happens if you take the longer route but you run? And it took you 1.5 minutes to get out. So that's all right, because it's the time that we are concerned about. Or is it the route? For whatever reason, you need to take the short route because that manifests that it's a shorter way. You walked very slow on the short route. It took you longer than it would have taken you had you gone the longer route. Doesn't matter. The short route, you put it in the long route, you chayv. Is it the time or is it the place? And you know where the Bes Yosef has the shaila? In his Shavuos, when we say that, if you have to go forward 4 meal for, let's say, washing your hands, behind 1 meal forward, 4 meal, is a four meal, let's say, according to one opinion, is 72 minutes. A meal is 18 minutes. Is it the time of 72 minutes? If you got to take a car and drive, today, it doesn't matter. Then you walk a horse. You're talking about a horse there. Is it at 72 minutes, or is it 4 meal, the distance? And you're not high beyond 4 meal. Doesn't matter how long it takes. Interesting question. Same idea, l'chayda. Don't remember him bringing this Gemara, but the same kind of question. Says the Gemara, what happens if you went the long route, but you ran? So it took you the same amount of time, but it taking you had to go in the shorter route. What would it then be then? Shiura Gemira? Is it the time? Therefore, if he ran quickly, he is potted. Or no, it dafka has to be that route for whatever reason. That's the halacha. No logic to it, but that's how it is. That if you're going the long way, I don't care how long it took you. You're chayiv, and you went the short way. I don't care how long it took you. Could be, in fact, potted. In fact, there's a bit of a question that you just said a minute ago. He's asking Rabba, was it Rabba before or That the din is that if you go the short way, even kolayim kulay, you are potter. So it's clear it's not the time. It's the road. What's the shaila even? So unless Abaye and Abba didn't hear what the Rabbi said, and they didn't hear that part of the din, and therefore Abaye is asking this question. Amalei, so Rabbi answered back, you cannot go down the longer road. It doesn't matter how quick you do it, doesn't go down the longer road. Is masculine Rav Zayda. Zayda asked the question now. You're telling me that you must go down the shorter road, you cannot use the longer road, no matter how fast you go. So that's the question. There's a din that the doesn't make sense. Ella de Kaimelan, we have this halacha. We didn't have so long in Moshe Tamei, somebody who was Tamei, a kohen who was Tamei, Shishimish, and he worked in the base of Migdash, unbeknown to him, or if he did it b'mezid, b'misa, if he did it b'mezid, it's chayiv misa. What misa b'dei shemayim? So now the question is, if he was Tamei and he walked into the base of Migdash, he's chayiv kares. A Tamei now walking in he's chayiv kares. It says over there that if he worked in the base of Migdash, he's chayiv misa b'dei shemayim. Sounds like he's not chayiv kares. So give me a heichik timtza. How is it that you are tamei in the base of English and you're chayiv misa shemayim, but you're not chayiv kares for walking in being tamei? And remember, even if you didn't walk in tamei, we just learned before, if you became tamei in the base of English, you know you're tamei, and you waited there long enough to take the bow down, which we just worked out, not very long, a couple of seconds, you're chayiv kares. And yet it says the only thing you're chayiv misa shemayim. The Taisus already asked, and he remains in the Tzarachian, why can't you be chayiv both? We're just focusing on Misa, and why is that important? Because we learned in Koris, we learned in the third page in Malchus, that according to some Tanoim, if you receive Malchus, it removes the Koris. If you receive Malchus, it removes the Koris. So therefore, if you give Malchus, it takes away the Koris, or Rebbe Kiva, if you give Malchus, it takes away the Koris, so then, but you'll still be chayiv Misa shemayim. So what's the problem? And he remains at Tzorchi. So he went further. Anyway, let's understand what Rabbi's question. Tell me, give me heiche timtza that the way we're learning right now is you're not getting kares, only getting misla shmai. Heiche mishkachlau. Give me an example. Either loisha, if we're talking about he had to become tummy in the base of Mikdash. If he was tummy outside and walked in, chayiv kares. Don't talk about it. He must have come tummy in the base of Mikdash. But we learned before, even if he became tummy in the base of Mikdash, if you were there, you spent a little bit of time there, you paused, you're already chayiv kares for that. So heichi avad avoda. If he didn't spend any time at all, well, he walked right out, right? So therefore, there's no kares because he wasn't there tummy long enough because he walked right out. What avoda can you do that takes only a few seconds? Navas, either shah. He spent a little bit of time there. No, about kares, he'll get kares because he's tummy and he spent time in the base of Migdash. So what's my question? What does that do with anything here? So like this. If you're going to tell me Shiyuda Gemiri, let's say the short road to go out from the base of Migdash, the short route takes you 3 minutes. The long route takes you, let's say, 5 minutes. How long is the avodah? Maybe a minute, right? So you're chayiv for Shia. But you took the aggregate, the minute in the base of Migdash and the 3 minutes of the route to go out of the base of Migdash. You have a total of 4 minute window. If you get out of the base of Migdash within 4 minutes, you won't get your kares. So what happens? He did an avodah that takes let's say a minute, or a minute and a half. He used the long route, but he ran. So the aggregate between, or he took the short route and he ran. And the aggregate between the two now was less. So even though he spent more time in Migdash, we only allow you 30 seconds, let's say, and that's it. He took him 2 minutes, but then he ran and he dashed out, and because he dashed out, the time is less. So if you learn it's a question of time, it's possible that he's not chayiv tumah, and yet he's chayiv for working based on English. If you manage to get out before that total time, that total window. But if you tell him to do with time, if you go the short route, you're always part. You go the long, you're chayiv, and avodah takes more than kedei shia, so you're always chayiv kares. How can you ever have mishlei shemayim? It's a question of time. So the honest nafshe b'ktzara. He used the short route and he ran, and so therefore the total time between the walking and the time that he spent in the base of Mikdash is less than what normally would be. So okay, so you're not chayiv kares, but you'll be chayiv mishlei shemayim because you worked in the base of Mikdash while you were tamei. Eli, if you tell me if you tell me it has to do dafki, you have to go down the short road. If you have to go down the short road, give me a case. How is it possible to do an avodah in less than kadeshia? Kadeshia might be 30 seconds. What avodah can you use such a short time? Omar Abai says, my question. Mishkachas, I'll tell you exactly. No, no problem. There is an avodah that you can do in less than 30 seconds. How? He's taking the short road, and as he's going, he's walking by the mizbech. He's on the other side of the mizbech. He's walking by. He takes a fork while he's walking, and he turns something over. You know when you make a steak or something, you have to turn it over in the middle of the cooking. So he turned over something on the mizbech. So now he accelerates the cooking, and therefore he didn't avoid. That's an avodah. That's an avodah, and because that's an avodah, so therefore there's no problem. It's he's not chayiv kares because he left. He did not spend time in the base of Mikdash and he went out the short way. But there's an avodah because while he was walking, he turned something over his fork. How do you know that's an avodah? Maybe an avodah is putting something on the fire. Once it's cooking, how do you know it's an avodah? It's what you made it cook 15 minutes faster. How do you know that's called avodah? Because Rabhuna. No, Rabhuna said Zor if a Yisrael, Shahapach v'Tzenayla for Yisrael walked in the base of Mikdash and he turned over something on the mizbech and since he accelerated up the cooking, Chai Misa. He's Chai Misa. So there's not a kasha here at all on Rabbah. That's not a question of time. It could be a question of just which road you're taking, and there's no problem about how is it possible not to be chayiv for misa for tamei, but you be chayiv for working in the base of midrash because you didn't spend any time. As soon as you were told, you walked out. And while you're walking, you turn something over. So the Gemara, what exactly did Rabhuna say? Gufel, let's analyze Rabhuna Zor, Shahav Tzedel Zor, it turns over in the meat, chayiv misa. Let's understand. Hey, what are we talking about? Either if he wouldn't have turned it over, the other side would have continuously remained raw. It wouldn't have been cooking. That's mamash avodah. You know, it's chiddush. Of course, if Yisrael did that, he cooked one side that never would have been cooking otherwise. No, that's avodah. What need to tell you that? No, boss. If you can tell me that if he wouldn't have turned it over, it would also cook. It would take a little bit longer the heat to penetrate. My so what do you do then? Why isn't it avodah at all? Says the he wouldn't have turned it over, it would take, let's say, 2 hours to cook or roast. Because what you did, you accelerated the process, it's going to cook a lot quicker. And hakamas and the chiddush of Rabbi is the chol kuroi avodah. That's also called an avodah. Interesting, the Ritva has a chakira here, which is a little hard to understand. He has a chakira here where, what about on Shabbos? If you turn something over on Shabbos, you know, it's on the fire cooking, but it's not fully cooked yet, you put it, let's say, raw right before Shabbos, you're allowed to, and then you went and you turned it over. So what you did would have cooked anyway, spend another hour on the fire, but because I turned it over, it's a lot quicker. Is that called cooking or not? Maybe it's only avodah, it's called avodah, not cooking. Which is interesting because the whole sugya of Yechester and Shabbos are called bamegis. Stirring, why you cannot stir on Shabbos is because you're mikarev, the things that were further from the fire are now going to be closer to the fire, and you're going to cause them to cook, even though they would have cooked further than fire as well. Otherwise, we're taking longer. So the cheder, what's the suffix? And maybe that din of Shabbos we talk to learn from here. From Rabbi Zayda's din here, that once we know that that if you just make something cook faster, it constitutes cooking. It's not relegated just to avodah. It's everywhere. That's called cooking. I'm not sure. Okay, anyway, to Gemara. Rabbi said, this is interesting. We had another Gemara. Rabbi was an unbelievable time, and everybody was, unbelievable about it. Everybody was scared of him. Nevertheless, Rabbi said, I want to say a chiddush in halacha. I'm worried of my friends that they might not agree with me. And he said it anyway. This is what he said. He said there's a thing called, when the Torah said that you have to, if the house has leprosy, the house itself, which we just read a few weeks ago, has leprosy. So what you do is you don't approach the kohen until you remove all your kalim from the house, because once the kohen comes in and you have this method of working out whether it's really a tsaras, if it's leprosy or not, and if it is, then everything, all the contents of the house is tamei. And the din is that if a person walks into that house, he becomes tamei. If you walk into a house that's been conferred a house of tzaras, and you walk in, you become tamei. So comes along Rabbi as follows: Hanichnis lebeis hamenug. If somebody walks into a house of leprosy, he walks in backwards. Afilu kula, his entire body walked in. Chutz mechaytmei, his nose is the only part of his body because it sticks out in front of you. Hasn't entered the house. Tar. When do you become tamei? Only if your entire body, as we'll see in the morning, explain why. If you entirely walk in, even backwards, then you become tamei. But if most of your body is, Faces already says, so what's the chiluk if you walk in forwards or backwards? I'll come back in a minute. The chiluk it says about habo el abayis. He dashes. Whenever it says habo, Derech bia asa toida. Whatever says haba means you got to walk in the normal way. If you walk in the normal way, you become tamei before your entire body is in. But if you walk in the backwards, you're not tamei until your entire body is in. But also toida. And I'm scared of my friends. You know why? Because they're going to ask me the following question. Then what's the chilik if your nose is sticking out? If your nose is sticking, if you walked in the wrong way, you should always be tired. That's what's bothering me, and that's why I hesitated in sharing this information. My Rabba, Rabba came along and said, that's not a problem. It says here we delay the claim who goes Shem by it says impossible. We don't want anything else to be tummy, so let's remove the house, clear the house before the coin comes. Now, these things didn't walk into the house when the house is tummy, they're there already. So a person who finds himself in the house is no worse than the kalim. So if you're there entirely, I don't care how you walked in backwards, forwards, you definitely become tummy. So it's not a problem. Aisha is right. It's not a problem. So Tracy says, however, we have a rule. We'll see it's machlek, but we have a rule that bia ben mixes loishma bia. So if you walk in straight, you still don't become tummy if only your thumb is in there or parts of your bodies. And the base of Migdash is different, as the trainer explained. The base of Migdash or machlek is your thumb is in there. You know how to be treated. But in a house of manug, if you walk in a house of leprosy, you don't become tummy unless most of your body walked in. Even you walked in normally. Because bia b'mixas bia. So why if most of your body walks in your tummy, it's still a bia b'mixas. Ruba kule. So Tezas news, if you're walking backwards, say the same thing. Ruba kule. So then Tezas explains, and the other showing him. So then what's the difference? You're walking forward or backwards? It's actually in halacha. Must be a difference because the Torah says clearly that if a habala bias, which means the Torah stresses when you become tummy, when you're going forwards, and we know that only applies when the rave of you. So it must be that if you're walking backwards, all of you. If you're there entirely like a cave, then that's it. So anyway, right? We learned, what do we learn? We're going to support the idea that Bia means only if you walk in the normal way, not if you're walking backwards. We learned in the base of Migdash, Gagin Halolu, in the base of Migdash, they build all these towers, they build all these different chambers and different rooms. Yeah, and you should know that these rooms, even though they might be Kodesh, but the roofs on top of those rooms were never discarded, never holy. So you don't say, oh, I'm in the base of Migdash and sit down and have a picnic on the roof of one of these rooms and have your kosher. You can't do that because it was never in this Kaddish. Tanya Namachi Gagin, hello, these roofs ain't oiklin sham kochi canada kochi because they were not in Scottish. They ain't sheikhtin sham kochim kala nor can you shecht over there kochim have to be shechted in the soften and all that, so we can do that. But kochim kalmo we're not so pedantic, so you cannot shecht on top of these roofs because they're not holy. The tomei shenichnes derech Gagin lehechel. Potter, if you walked into the base of Migdash, not the normal front door, you walked in the front gate, you walked in through the roof, you are potter into the Heichel. Even though we know that the Heichel is different, that the room on top of the Heichel, that Leo is very holy, in fact, in a way, it's holier than anything else there, but not the roof of this room. And then it says, Migdash loy savai. And what do we dashen? That'll be us a Torah. So we see clearly from here, and we say the thing like mezuzah, derech b'yascha. No, we say clearly from here when the Torah says bar, it's the way that people normally walk in. So this supports Rabbi Ishia's din, and even though he was intimidated by his friends, he didn't have to be. And yeah, the Mishnah says the Mishnah continues. This is a typical example of a mitzvah that we explain as follows. We're going to learn Hodius. In Hodius, which is all about, it's only 13 blab, it's all about but the dinin that make mistakes in their psak, and they tell Klal Yisrael, we have a machlekes and Klal Yisrael, or just to even a shavit, they tell them that this is permitted, and the din is that if they would have done, an individual would have done a mistake, he would bring a special kind of carbon, but if the Klal Yisrael did a mistake based on the bezin psak, the bezin brings a par helim dovish tzibur, the bezin brings a special bull, special carbon, and if a kohen gadol even privately brings the same thing. And then the rule is only those dinim that if you individually would have made a mistake, you bring a carbon chatas kavua, a fixed animal. So then if the bezin made a mistake, they bring the parham davar tzibur. But if you individually would have brought a carbon oil a carbon that depending how wealthy you are, then the bezin, if they made a mistake, they don't bring that parham davar tzibur. So therefore, it says over here, zu hi mitzvah asay shemigdash chayav. This is a mitzvah say that you have to walk out straight away. Is a mitzvah say that the bezin paskin, you don't have to walk out straight away. Or let's say bezin paskin, I don't care which way you go. You can go the longer way as long as you run, for example, which was just learned. It was a mistake in halacha. If they would have said that, they would not bring a par hel davar tzibur. And why not? Because even an individual does not bring a fixed chatas, you bring a carbon oil of the yared. So zuhi mitzvah say mitzvah ein chayav nolah. And then the Mishnah says, but by nida, that is a typical mitzvah say that you are chayiv on it. that if they made a mistake regarding the laws of niddah, we'll discuss which law it is. For example, they made a mistake, you will bring a carbon. And why do we bring only niddah? Every Aveda, if there's a carbon chatas, why punct highlight niddah? Because niddah is very similar. The case we're going to talk about niddah is that you started the relations and then suddenly you became a niddah and you have to leave, which is very similar to the case of tumah. You became tummy inside the base of English and you have to leave. They made a mistake here in how you leave. They made a mistake there in paskening how to leave over there. And here you won't bring a carbon par helm over but here you will. It's only the contrast, but it's not limited only to niddah. So first thing Moshe says, like we just spoke about, what's a zuhi mitzvah? What are you talking about? The common zuhi Hasakai is referring to Masechta Hadis. And there it says, "Ein chayovin ala seva lois." The best makes a mistake when it comes to base major. They're not chayiv. The ein mevin asham toli, and in the visual, asham toli is you bring a carbon. You're not sure if you committed a beta. There's a piece of fat that you don't know if it was shuman or chaylev. You know it's kosher treif or machlekes if you have to have two pieces or one piece. And the bottom line is, then you bring an asham toli, a suspended asham, and if one day you find out the truth, you bring a chatzas. And otherwise, asham toli takes care of it. But if the bezin made a mistake, they don't bring a carbon. Why not? Because only if it's a carbon chatas kavur. So you bring an asham toli. And then it says, Zuhi mitzvahs asay shebemigdash. This is a mitzvah asay in the Midrash that you have to leave if you become tummy. There's a license not to enter the base of Migdash. There's a say that you have to leave. And the same will be by Niddah. There's a license that you're not allowed to have relations with a Niddah. And there's an assay that you have to leave. And we'll soon see later how you have to leave. And she'ein chayavin oleh, but you're not chayav. This is the case by Niddah. You were having relations, intimate relations with a woman, and at the time when you started, she was tired. Right, it's like you walked in the base of Migdash, you were tired, you became tummy in the base of Migdash. Suddenly she began to have a period in middle of relations, so you became tummy while you're in middle. But she says to him, she tells him, by the way, I just became a niddah. Upitish miyad. So what does he do? His impulse is to right away stop relations. Chayiv, you did an aveda here. You're over and I say. Why are you over and I say? Exiting still brings you satisfaction. You have to wait until your aver becomes limp before you exit, and you didn't. So you're chayv over nasei. That's the contrast. Neither anything. Itmar Abaye. Now the more will focus on this din over here. Itmar Abaye says, "Mashav Chibarav." Abaye's name of Chibarav. Chayiv shtaim. You actually committed two avedas. We'll soon see why you chayiv two avedas. One for having relations, and one for exit. The way you exited. Now, why are you chayiv for having relations? We just said it happened. This is an onus. It's not your fault. In the middle of the relations, as you came in spontaneously. So, why do we treat you as a shaygig that you did something wrong? You will see in a minute. A shaygig is that you could have, there's some negligence that you could have avoided it, and you just, ignorance, whatever it is. But there's an onus. It's beyond you. You have no control of this. We'll see in a minute. And he more explains. The choda aprisha. One for having relations in the first place, and one for the way you exited. And now the Gemara is going to try to understand. Heavy but Rava. Rava tried to understand. Can't be that Rava is focusing on the Abaye Rava's thing. It's Rava. B'mai. What exactly happened there? Now remember, there's a thing called Samuch Levesta, a woman who knows that she experiences periods every 30 days, let's say, or whatever, a certain amount of time, and then the din is that the husband has to separate from his wife. We'll see later in the Gemara tomorrow how much 12 hours, 24 hours you have to separate from your wife, and his machlekes whether it's mahatoyim or derabbanan, but you have to separate from your wife because you should anticipate that she'll probably see again. This is her time that she has a period. That's called Samuch Levesta, right next to her time period. Then you have a time which is ain't Samuch Levesta. If it's not her time of a period and you have relations, suddenly you have a niddah, that's mamash einus. It's not your fault. But if it's Samuch Levesta, if it's a time that you anticipate you're having, that's hakamazid. You shouldn't have had relations. It's awesome. I tell you, but it's awesome. So where's the shaygig? So you might ask, what are we talking about here? Who are we talking about here? Somebody who's a knowledgeable person. Okay, I can think of a way that is a shaygig for having relations. How? Because you're not supposed to have relations. Because Kasavar, he thought he thought that he's able somehow or another. He knows the din, but he was convinced that he knows how. As soon as he sees some kind of motion by her, he'll right away exit. So therefore, she won't be nid at the time. She won't be. He made a cheshbon in his mind that he'll be able to. So he's not annoying us anymore because you knew, but you're not amazed either because in your mind you thought that you can get out, that you can circumvent that she'll be niddah. So even though you did on Isa Rabbanan, which is one of the ayahs they bring that's only Yasa Rabbanan, but still, excuse me, he's a shaykik as far as this is concerned. El Aprisha, Amai. What did he tell me that he bring the second karбachata for leaving? If he's a Talmid Chacham, he knows that he should have waited till his Ava member becomes limp, and he didn't, so he's amazed. So where's the second chatas? Navas. The Iba Amar, we're talking about an Amoritz, who doesn't know the dinim at all, then Idi. Then we have a rule. What happens if the din is if you did the same Aveda 2, 3, 4 times? We had in the Shabbos, the 7th page, they all, one Shabbos of another, or one more. You did the same Aveda 3, 4, 5, 6 times. Do you bring one karmachata? You ate treif 10 times a day. And you bring one karmachata to 10. So we say it depends. If there was a hoydelav, if there was a yedi in between, in other words, you ate a karmachatz, you didn't realize that it was treif. You ate something treif, you didn't realize it was treif. And then you found out it was treif, and then you forgot again. Every time you know, the yedi is mechalkus. Every time you know, it's like a new aveira now. Then you forget, it's a new aveira. But if there was no yedi in between, and you ate 10 kazesim an hour after every hour, you only bring one karmachatz. So now let's go back to the Amoritz. The Amoritz had no idea a thing that if he anticipated the period, you're not allowed to have relations. He thought that she's a niddy, you don't have relations. But as long as she's not a niddy, no problem. So the Amoritz, he doesn't know the din about not having relations in the first place. He doesn't know the din about that the exit, they have to wait till the Eber's limp. The Idi, this is both. It's like he did the same event twice. Now, what do you mean knows the same event twice? He found out she said I'm a niddah. So there was a idea here. But the Amoritz thinks, oh, that's not a shagi, that's an einus. Amoritz thinks, oh, I did nothing wrong. It happened. When is an idea? Rashi explains some of the shayim of Rashi. When is the idea if you knew that you just did a very bad mistake? In other words, they tell you, oh, by the way, you just ate treif. Oh, you know that it's wrong to eat treif. So that's called the idea. It's not just knowing what he did, knowing that it's wrong what he did. So then he forgets a second time. That's a new avera. Over here, she said, I'm a niddah. What does he think? I did nothing wrong. He think, okay, but when I started, she wasn't a niddah. What did I do wrong? He doesn't know this din that you're not allowed to have a relation with Samach Levesta. So therefore, so there was no, that's not called the idea. Knowing that she's a niddah, but thinking there was no aveda involved is not a idea. So then he continued, then he exited, straight away. It's one hemshech. Where's the 2 karmachatois? So you have to conclude, we're talking about B'She ain't Samach Levesta. We're talking about that it's not near a period. Not near a period. So let's figure out again. How do you get 2 chatois? Who are we talking about? If a Talmid Chacham, then he should bring any carbon. Why? Because it's an oinus. If it's not a period, it's not the time of a period. So they had relations, and suddenly she became a niddah. That's not his fault. That's an oinus. You don't bring a carbon for that. And then when he exited, he was amazing because he's a Talmid Chacham. So where's the second carbon? So there's no carbon at all. Loy chadu. Loy mechayiv. Loy mechayiv aknisa onus. He's not chayiv for starting a relation with her because it wasn't the time of a period. And aprisha as part of exiting makes it. Navas must be talking about Amoritz. If we're talking about Amoritz, there's only one carbon, like we just said before. He beginning is an einus, and the second one he's a shaigi. So there's only one carbon. We get 2 karbanos. Chadahu the chayiv aprisha. He's only chayiv on the prisha. He's not chayiv for the knisa because he didn't know. I mean, nobody knew. Hadar Amar Rabba, that Rabba said, L'aylam b'samach levesta. Interesting here. Must be talking about it was samach levesta. It was samach levesta. We did get 2 karbanos. We said by Amoritz is 1 carbon. By Talmid Chacham, okay, there's a shaygig in the beginning because he thought that he's able to make sure it doesn't happen either. But l'chayda, he's amazed by prisha. So the Gemara says, Talmid Chacham l'zu b'dal l'zu. Hey, Talmid Chacham doesn't mean he has to be a baki b'shas. If he knows one thing, he's ready Talmid Chacham. He's Talmid Chacham in this area. He's not Talmid Chacham in that area. So he knew the din about Samach Levesta, but he thought he can get around it. So he's a shaygig. But he did not know the din. So within Hilchos Nid itself, if he knew some dinim and some dinim he didn't, he's a Talmid Chacham. You can call him a Talmid Chacham. Actually, we had more Shabbos of Kuf Yudal there. The Gemara said Talmid Chacham is, Masechta Kala. So the Machlek is Rashi and Tosfos there, what it means. So Rashi said, even if all he knows is Masechta Kala, it's the smallest Masechta, and there's no real Gemara. Even if it's one of the smallest Masechta in the back of the Zohar, even if you know just one little bit, you're a Talmid Chacham. And Tosfos says, no, it means you know the entire Shas, even the little ones that we don't do in Daf Yomi. Don't know why we don't do that. We're beautiful, and we don't do them. And that's what Talmid Chacham is. So here you see clearly, be Talmid Chacham. In one area, you're a Talmid Chacham. Bottom line is, We found the case of two Amar of the Rava, the Tavayatina. Really, both of these dinim regarding Sobel Chavesti shouldn't have relations. And when Prisha, you should wait till your member becomes limp. We already know from other places. Tanina, we learn Prisha, Tanina, actually, Tanina, we said, Amar of Tavaya, Tanina, Kanisa, Tanina, Prisha, we learned both of them. Prisha, Tanina, we learned in the Prisha, the Tani, it says, that what when you exit, it has to wait till the member becomes limp. Okay, she was tired and it wasn't. We'll soon see what it was a period of time or not. At the time when you started, she was tired. But Amra Loya, she said to him, "Nitmeisi, I became a nida upidish miyad, and you didn't, spontaneously, impulsively, you pulled out chayiv, you chayiv." So it says clearly here the prisha, if you don't wait until your ava becomes limp, you're chayiv. So we already know that there's a prisha from here. Kinisa, so too Kinisa. Tanina, this is what we learned. And when we Kinisa, the way we learned right now, we're talking about Samach Levesta, and this Talmud Chacham thought they didn't get around it because an Amoritz is like you wouldn't be bringing two kabbanis. So Samach Levesta, and he thought he could get around it. Tanina also learned it. We learned it. It was a whole sugi. We learned Masechta Nida. What happens after they had relations? You're supposed to check yourself. They checked themselves, and they found blood on their shmata. So you make a difference if he found it on her cloth or on his cloth. And regarding her cloth, you make a difference whether it happened it was immediately after they had relations, she found blood, then there's a very strong probability that she was already a nida while they were having relations, or she only found it a while later. She didn't check herself till a while later, then you found it. Now it's a suffix. We know it did happen now, did it happen before. So right now we're talking about the case where he found it on his. If it found it on his, it definitely came from her. So it says as follows: Nimtza al shaloi, if he found blood on the cloth that he used to check himself, then Tumeyin, they're both Tamei and Chayavim be carbon. And he Chayav a carbon because they didn't realize it was shaky. Now what's the case here? My love, the Samach Levesta, what's the case here? Probably we're talking about it was Samach Levesta, and yet you're Chayiv for Knisa. You're Chayiv. So we see from here, we learn out of din that Samach Levesta you consider a shaygi. In other words, if it would not have been Samach Levesta, it would have been Stam. She was not expecting, anticipating, it was not the time of a period, and you found blood. That's an oinus. Why would you be bringing carbon? Even if let's say she became a nida during intimacy, you wouldn't. There's no shaking here. There's no negligence here, and therefore you wouldn't be bringing a carbon. The fact that you bring a carbon means there was some negligence here. Why? Must be talking about Samach Levesta. So here we see that this din, that Samach Levesta, you bring a carbon chatzas, just for that, we already know. No raya from here. I can tell you, you're telling me that's already said over here. I can argue that this din over here, finding blood on his cloth, is talking about it was not Samach Levesta. So why bring a carbon? If he found out, why bring a carbon? But Aprisha, who said the carbon here is we're making you bring a carbon because you started your relations? No, you were an It's not your fault. We're making you bring a carbon because of the way you exited. You can ask me a question. You can ask me, why do I need another mission to tell you the thing that you should exit, how to exit, when we just brought down before another mission which says, that the Bryce we brought before. We already learned it. Sorry, the mission before, we already learned it. That what do you call it? That you bring a carbon. What do you have to say about Prisha? That you have to wait until the Ava die. What do you have to tell me again? Says the Gemara. No, the purpose of this is Lashmi teaches another than altogether. To teach you what? Nimtza al shalah. Really, Rebbe wants to bring you a contrast between if you found it on his material or on her material. Because by her material, it depends how close it was to the relations. On his material, even if a while later, we're going to say it came from her. So, and Rebbe's trying to draw the contrast. So he's not repeating it because he wants to teach you the din of Prisha. He's more repeating it. He wants it to show the contrast between the two. So how do you know that we're talking about that? We need our Mishnah to tell you the din about Shegig by Knisa, because from that other Mishnah we would think the reason why you bring a Karbachatz is because the way you left the Prisha, don't do with the Knisa. And we need to know the halacha that you bring a Karbachatz for Knisa as well. So, so the Gemara, what do you call it? So nimtza al shalah to me, it comes to you this nimtza al shalah. If you found it on her material, tmeim the tamei besafik. They're the only tamei going to suffix. If it was a short while later, It's a suffix. Did it happen before? Did it happen afterwards? Therefore, terminal carbon. And the idea the boy Mishnah Nimtza Shalai, Nimtza Shalai. So maybe this Mishnah over here, Nimtza, is talking about when it says Nimtza Al Shalai, that you have to bring a carbon, terminal carbon for the Prisha. How do we know that Knisa also brings a carbon? That's what we need our mission. How can you tell me that's talking about Prisha? What does it say there? It says Nimtza al Shaloi, which means he didn't know B'Shas that means B'Shas Ma'aseh had no idea that she was if it's not Samach Levesta, the whole thing's an Einus, including the exit also was an Einus. Because you didn't know there was a problem until you found it on the material, on the little cloth later on. So, what's going on there? It's an Einus bringing it to the end. Nimtza, Nimtza Tani. The Nimtza Lebazarach Nimtza sounds like he didn't know about it till afterwards. The appreciation, if you're telling me that the Korban Chattas is on the Prisha because he should have known, now that you know she's a Nida, you have to know that you should know the Din. Mikara, Kiparish, and Mikara have a idea. And you knew before. You appreciate Mikara, Kiparish, like Mikara have a idea. You knew before. That Nimsa. Now, this is interesting. Amalei Rava said to Rav Ada, Sayis Maidika Amba Rabba. Listen to what your teacher just told you, which is very modern. Ravina and Rav Ashi were the ones who finished Shas. Rav Ashi was born the day Rabba was passed away. So Ravina, if Ravina was a teacher, Rav Ada learned by Rabba as well as according to this, by Ravina as well. In fact, it looks like Ravina was his made of. How old Ravina would have been then when he sat down with Rav Ashi to finish Shas? He would have been a very, very old man. So I saw some other Shana was who wants to learn that Rabba is saying, listen to what I'm telling you. So you might go, Rabba, I'm your Rebbe. This is what I'm telling you, because Ravina is not shaykh to be the Rebbe of Rav Ada B'Masra. But if he was, the way Rashi learned Pasha he was, he would have been a very, very old man when he was with Rav Rashi would have been a very young man. Together they made Shas. And Amalei said, Hey Chimotzis, he said to him, Hey Atzis, so the Tanya we learned. Here look at this. How can I listen to Tanya? We learned in the Braisa, Rav Ada continues. It says Allah, we learned a Braisa commenting on this mission. Zu hi mitzvahs asay shebenida. This is the mitzvah asay. No, but he's saying back, you're telling me we're talking about Kanisa. You're telling me this place here talks about Kanisa and so on. And that's the question. How can you tell me we're talking about Kanisa? We learned in the Braisa. Zuhi, this is an example of a mitzvahs asay shebenida shechayavin aleh that yechayev korban chattas. Now, the loises you only bring a chattas on a loises. The loises is you're not allowed to have relations with it. The asay is about how he's supposed to, if he did, he's supposed to go out straight away. So he was over to asay because he didn't wait to the limb. So it says over here, Zuhi mitzvah chavir mitzvah loises. If you're telling me it's talking about knisa. If you tell me it's talking about Knisa, if you tell me it's talking about Knisa, about how you started relations, then you're telling me, Rav is asking, I'm telling you it's talking about Prisha. You're telling me it's talking about Knisa and Samach Levesta, but you thought you can get around it. And that's what, and therefore Tanina. You tell me, right? We learned that you shouldn't have relations and there's a Shagi B'Rein Korban Chattas. If you're talking about Knisa, then it's not a say. It's a loisa say you're over. Why does the Braisa say this is an example? On this mission, it says this is an example of an asay by nida you're over an asay. Now you're telling me what happened here was that he had relations with her, with some Levesta and all that, shayik. Because if it's not some Levesta, it's an some Levesta, but he thought some Chacham, he can get around it. So how can you call this an asay? What you were over, you was a loisa asay. You're not allowed to have relations with nida. So therefore, I'm right. We're talking about here Prisha. You did the wrong thing by Prisha, and Prisha is only your over and asay because you're supposed to stop. And you sort of continue. The mitzvah loisasi. That's his question back to Rava. On Malay, so I'll answer back. You're right. We're going to have to amend the Braisa. If the Braisa says so, chosev v'tani hachi. Some words are missing. This I have to learn. Zui mitzvah loisasa shebenida. We definitely think it's talking about Knisa. It can't be talking about Prisha, because then, if it's talking about Prisha, then why? It says Nimtza, which means you only found out afterwards. Why in the world you bring a Korban Chattas when you exited, when it was an Einus, you had no idea. Must be talking about Knisa. I asked me a question, if it's talking about Knisa, why is it called an Asay? It should be a Loisa. You're right. Amend the Braisa. Zu hi mitzvahs Loisa sheshabedida, shechayovin ala yechayiv. Hoya mishamish im hatoira. But what about in the following case? So we're going to add all these words in the brisa. But what about if he was having relations with a woman? She was tired at the time. But Amrullah, then she says to me, Macy, I became tummy. Upidish miyad, and he right away exited. Chayiv is chayiv, and this is mitzvah seisha benida. All these words are missing. So when the Brisa said that this is mitzvah seisha benida, it wasn't talking about this Mishnah, but adding all these words. But in the case of Prisha, that's a typical example of that he was over an anasei. Omar Mar, just finish the Gemara here. Pidish miyad chayiv. So, hey, what should you do? You're telling me that if he found out she's a nida and he right away exits, is the right thing to do? No, he's over nasei. So what should he do? You dig in your 10 fingers into the ground, ad sheyamus, until your member comes limp, and the tuvia, and he should be blessed for that. Good on him. In other words, wait, don't move and don't do anything, and let the passion go away, and then you exit. Otherwise, if you go straight away, even though you thought you did the right thing, you're actually continuing the aved of having relations with the niddah, and you'll be over and nasei. So bottom line is, Tanina, both of Tanina, they didn't appreciate the din of Knisa, both Parisha. Now Mishnah just puts it together here to explain the chiluk between niddah and Beis Hamikdash, even though they're very similar, that here the Bezin won't bring a carbon if they made a mistake in the psak, and by niddah they will bring a carbon if they made a mistake in the psak. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 past 7. Have a good day.